Hello, and welcome to ShePack Unleashed. I'm one of your hosts, Tania.
I'm Nichole. Welcome to your weekly dose of candid discussion and the pursuit of finding your tribe in this journey of motherhood, womanhood, and sisterhood.
I'm Ashley. Join us as we leave no stone unturned. In each episode, we have heart-to-heart conversations that aim to challenge and empower one another.
I'm Jenny. No more waiting. ShePack Unleashed begins now. In this episode, reproductive freedom.
So today starts out with a healthy disclaimer, I think, that this episode is going to be all about reproductive freedom and the current struggle that is going on in the U.S. right now in terms of women's autonomy and choice over their health and well-being and how that affects them and how it affects us. And obviously, we are not medical professionals in any way, shape, or form. So if you are in need of any sort of medical consultation, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a provider, or there are some other networks that we're going to connect you to at the end of this episode as well, and other resources. If you find yourself in need of resources, we want to help connect people as best we can. But it's going to be a wild ride on this one.
It's going to be spicy.
Yeah.
Different kind of spicy.
Yeah.
Good spicy.
This is a conversation that I think y'all have wanted to have for over a year. And I have to admit that I was the one who is most reluctant. I'm also the most religious of the bunch. And for me, those things are really tied. And my opinion on the topic has changed greatly over the past 20 years. So there's just a ton of nuance, especially when it comes to abortion. But that's certainly not the only piece we're talking about today. And so as soon as we were like, we're going to do this, it is time, I thought of my friend Katey, who I met actually like probably almost 10 years ago now, because our kids were in preschool together at a Spanish immersion preschool. So her oldest, only Sam, is about the same age as our oldest. And we've never really hung out before, just the two of us. But
You asked me to do a wedding, though.
I did.
During the pandemic.
Katey has saved me 3 times.
Call you in for the big guy.
Once my car wouldn't start, and she was like the one parent that I was like, I think I know her enough from stalking her on Facebook that I could trust her to drive my kid.
I don't even remember that.
I called you. I didn't even have your
now
number.
I do, but
it was
totally
the daycare gave you the phone like while you were picking up Sam.
Okay.
And you drove
I
Chris
do
to the
remember
gym.
that now.
So and then my next door neighbors wanted to get married. And I was like, I think I know someone. And now we're going to have this topic. And I'm like, I think I know. So I owe you. So thank you now for coming 3 times to join us for this conversation. It's a tough one.
So we want to know about you. Tell us anything about yourself that you want to share and kind of your perspective coming to this conversation. And then we'll dive into all the good stuff.
Yeah. Well, that was a fun blast from the past, remembering saving you that day. I totally forgot about that, but I do remember getting to the wedding, and that was a real highlight for me in 2020 when we were all cooped, and just getting to remember that there's always good. Mm-hmm. There's always beautiful things happening in the midst of the crisis. I have to remember that. That might be helpful for us in this conversation too.
Yeah.
But I am Katey Zeh. I live here locally in North Carolina. So this is the first time I've gotten to do a podcast in person with people, which is a delight.
Girlfriend now. We feel honored.
I'm like, I want to be an honorary member of the ShePack.
You are now.
For life.
Okay.
You're stuck with us now.
Great. I love inserting myself into circles of people. And I'm an ordained Baptist minister and also a pro-choice minister, which people find very interesting and confusing. I like to confuse people.
I find that so beautiful. I can't wait.
Yeah, and I was ordained to this work. I've been working in reproductive freedom work really since my early 20s when I went to seminary. And I went to Yale Divinity School, not kind of avoiding the real world. I mean, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I ended up volunteering at the Planned Parenthood just down the street. And I was so moved by what I saw there. I asked if I could come every week and ended up in the procedure room holding patients' hands. And it was the most sacred experience of my life. And I just remember thinking, the people who are outwardly religious are outside yelling at patients coming in. And the real sacred work is happening in this procedure room. And I have to figure out a way to bridge these two things. And that has been my life's work. And so now I have the honor of serving as CEO of the Religious Community for Reproductive Choice, which I will call RCRC. And they actually trained me to be able to go into that procedure room. So it's just been a joy to stay connected with them and to lead them right now. And that work has never been more difficult than it is now and never more important. And in addition to that, I am a late in life lesbian. I have a 10-year-old daughter who is my best friend and such a joy and reminds me every day of why I do this work. And I'm just hoping that she will join me in this work. I was going to say, I hope that the world is kinder for her. And I hope that is true. But more than that, I hope she is better equipped than I was going into this harsh world to be that light and to make the world a kinder place for others. So that's a little bit about me.
So I find it so interesting. You went to seminary school. Were you raised in like a religious household? Was that something that like you always wanted to do, or did you find a calling for that?
Yeah. So I always talk about how I didn't go, I was in Southeast Georgia in a small town where like even the Catholics were evangelical was sort of the feel of it. But my family was not religious. And I didn't even go into church until my maternal grandmother, with whom I was very close, got terminally ill. And she went back to church, and it was a time that I got to be with her. And I think it continued to be my connection to her after she died. But more than that, I did feel like a real resonance with the story of who Jesus was as someone who was kind and compassionate and resisted systems of oppression. Even though I could not have articulated it that way, there was something I found very inspiring about him. And because it was something I did get to choose for myself, I stayed connected with it and became very conservative evangelical. But then when I got to college and started studying theology, I realized there are so many different ways to be a faithful person, that the kind of theology I had been exposed to was one of many kinds, and I didn't have to continue in that realm. And so I feel like my real conversion was in college when I actually got to study and learn, understand the history of the church, and realize I could be a faithful person who advocated for human rights and dignity and reproductive freedom and still maintain my faith tradition and reclaim some of that tradition that I think had been, manipulated, and I was told it meant something, and realizing there's actually a lot of liberating stuff in this text, and I refuse to give it up to those who would oppose the work that I do. So it's been a journey for me, but really one that I feel like I got to choose for myself, and that's not true for many people. So I feel very grateful for that, and my faith, continues to evolve now, but it did very much feel like a path that I got to choose for myself, and I'm grateful for that.
Amazing. I think there's so much that we can talk about in this episode. There's obviously more than we could possibly cover. And we wanted to try at least to provide a little bit of a framework for folks, because I think there's a lot of misinformation out in the world right now around what is abortion, what is reproductive care, these different pieces. And so at least we wanted to discuss what is even included under the term of abortion. We hear it thrown around a lot. And so at least just to provide that framework, right? Generally, abortion is a medical procedure that intentionally terminates a pregnancy, and that could be for a whole slew of reasons. And there's two main buckets that falls into, either medication abortions or surgical abortions. So medication abortions, you use a medication to end a pregnancy early. You might have heard of like Plan B, right? But the drug is mifepristone that you've probably heard people talk about and maybe did or did not connect it with this procedure.
Can I ask a quick?
Is Plan B?
Can I jump in?
That's
Yeah,
different.
actually, Plan B is an emergency contraceptive.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
That's why we're having the conversation.
Right. Yeah. So it's not actually abortifacient. It is what you take, if you did not use
Plan
a
B is
barrier
before contraception.
It's an emergency contraception. So
right
after you've had unprotected sex, but
Is
medication
that considered?
abortion.
Like, is that at risk in kind of the current conversation about reproductive care? Like,
Yes.
people loop it in under abortion.
It is depending on how people want to define pregnancy and when life begins. And so we were talking earlier before we started recording that there is an effort politically to change it to, fertilization as the beginning of life rather than implantation, because Plan B, if it's implanted, won't work, but it will prevent a fertilized egg from implanting in the uterus. Just that often happens, like many times. We all know we're pregnant at one time, that there are times when there's a fertilized egg that doesn't implant or isn't successfully implanted. So Plan B is just an assistant basically to keeping the uterus from that fertilized egg.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Fun fact, Plan B has a 4-year shelf life.
And an upper weight limit. It is less effective on heavier people too.
Yeah.
But you should still use it, and
For sure.
You don't take two.
But my whole entire don't take two. My whole entire point is that it's a 4-year shelf life. So if you need
Buy
it
some now.
in this current climate, you can get it now, and hopefully it'll take you
You
through
can buy it online, ship right to your house.
the next 4 years.
No, thank you for that correction. I mean, that's how easy the misinformation can happen, right? Like with every best of intention, me being flustered, I said the wrong thing, right? But
it's all good. We're learning together.
That is how these conversations can cycle downwards so easily, especially in the world of social media. So thank you very much. So that's medication abortion. Typically, those happen. What is the range in which during gestational range that is typically used? It's early on, correct?
I believe it's most effective going up to roughly 10 to 12 weeks. I'm not a medical professional, but you would need to look that up. But it is a first trimester method. It could be effective post that, but is most effective earlier in pregnancy.
And it's most widely used early in pregnancy.
Correct. It's definitely first trimester, and I'm not even sure if it goes all the way to the 13-week mark, but it is very effective. I think 95% of the time up to, I think, roughly 10 to 12 weeks. But please look it up. And if you're using it, ask the medical professional who prescribed it to you, or if you're using it on an online service. All this information is readily available if you Google it, and we'll link to resources at the end as well.
Yeah. So, okay. The other bucket is surgical abortions. Typically, those do happen a little bit later in the pregnancy. And there's many types of surgical abortions that can happen that you might have heard the terms for. There's aspiration, which is common for pregnancies up to 14 to 16 weeks, where a suction device is used to remove the contents of the uterus. There is dilation and curettage. A D&C is a very common word that's being thrown around right now. It is performed after a miscarriage or an abortion, and it will remove the tissue from the uterus. It involves dilating the cervix in order to take out the uterine lining. Dilation and evacuation is used for pregnancies after 16 weeks. So the fetus is more developed, it is larger, and there's a combination of suction and surgical instruments that will remove the fetal and placental tissue. There's induction abortion. It induces labor using medications to expel the pregnancy. It says rarely used and typically in later pregnancies or specific medical situations. And then hysterectomy is one that I wasn't expecting to see here. It's an abortion by cesarean section. It's a surgical procedure to remove the fetus through an incision in the uterus, typically, again, only for medical emergencies. So when the mother's life is at risk, correct?
Can I offer just one other thing about surgical, that it can be done at any point during the pregnancy. So even early pregnancies
they can elect to have.
They can elect. Some people choose the surgical. It's quicker, but it also requires you usually to have a ride home, because there's general anesthesia of some kind usually, or twilight. But with the medication abortion, you can do that at home. So it's really kind of a personal preferencing, but it's a longer procedure, and sometimes still has to be followed up with like a surgical abortion if it's not successful the first time. But
well, and something that you shared it through your book, right, and through the work that you're doing, is that medication abortion it's painful, it is traumatic, it is very difficult, right, for the person undergoing that medication-induced abortion. And so I don't want anyone to think that this is some sort of easy way out. Like, this is, whether it's a surgery or the medication one, it's not like they just pop a pill and then like they go shopping after. Like it's very, very different. And so in your book, you go into more depth where women shared their own personal stories about going through medication abortions. And I think it's really powerful to hear those stories directly from those individuals.
So Jenny has a copy of the book. Can you name it and show it for us?
Yes. Oh, please. It's A Complicated Choice, Making Space for Grief and Healing in the Pro-Choice Movement by
I'm a bad author. I didn't even name that in my
lady
intro.
I know.
I know.
So bad.
Katey Zeh, with a foreword from Alexis McGill-Johnson, who is the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood, which I didn't realize. I listened to it, actually, and then most recently picked up this copy because there were things I wanted to highlight and get back to. And I think there's so much to tackle here, but even hearing you describe all of that, like, makes me want to cry. I feel such intense sadness. And I've never had an abortion, but I know women and I trust women, and I know no one goes into that lightly.
Yeah.
But I did have some underlying beliefs about people who have abortions and under what circumstances. Like, growing up, I always assumed it was like teenagers. And I always, if I'm being really honest, I have had to do a lot of work to break some of like the internalized racism and social stuff that I've learned growing up. So I do sometimes automatically think of a minority, or a certain economic status, and that's totally unfair and false.
I'm with you. I remember growing up when I first became aware that this was even a thing. It was told to me that, from lots of different sources, that it's irresponsible teenagers who just don't, can't keep it in their pants, and then they get in trouble and they want an abortion. It is so wildly out of touch with the reality of what is happening and the individuals who are choosing or who need abortion care.
It was presented similarly to me too, like a shame-based kind of thing. Like, you don't want to be one of them.
That's so interesting.
Cautionary tale.
But yeah, very cautionary
That's
tale.
interesting because that's not true for me. That was not ever presented that way. And I grew up in a Catholic household. And when I say that very loosely in terms of I have Christmas Catholic parents, right? Christmas and Easter Catholic parents. And I myself am not religious. I do not believe in God personally and do not believe in that. But I love that that is something other people believe in, right? I don't hold anything against people who do that. It's just not what I believe personally. And so it was very interesting because my parents were always very clear that, like, if you were to get pregnant as a teenager or as a young adult and it used something you did not want, you let me know and we will take care of it.
That's amazing.
I've never heard of a parent saying that to their child. Props to Donna.
Yeah. Donna's a little more progressive than you think.
I mean, I don't know Donna. I just,
Yeah.
there's so much
But
to
I
say.
think I think my mother grew up
conversation.
with having kids very young, right? And did not get to go to college and did not do the life she may have wanted for herself because she got pregnant. And she had a miscarriage the first time she got pregnant and then had so much guilt about that miscarriage because she thought she caused it.
Yep.
By wishing it away.
Oh, that's hard.
And then got pregnant intentionally after that.
She felt bad.
Because she felt bad. And then continued to just make those choices and never wanted that for me.
We never talked about anything, gender, sexuality, puberty even at all in our family. And I remember watching Dirty Dancing, which was one of my favorite movies, still is.
Still is too.
And never understanding what happened to Penny. Like I was much older until I finally understood. I didn't pick up on it at all.
Yep.
I didn't understand what she had to have done.
I wish my mother would have said something.
I remember
while we watched it
asking my
together.
parents and they didn't answer me.
They never say the word, which is so typical
Oh, they
for
don't?
depictions of abortion media, is that the word isn't used. And I think that is such a missed learning opportunity to not just say what it was. That reinforces the stigma, even while it is an abortion story, that we all need to know of the pre-Roe times when people had to, pay a doctor who may or may not be qualified to provide care. Well, never said.
That's exactly right? Like whether it's legal or not, it will still happen. And I think it's about putting women's safety first. And, to be completely honest, the second time I ever heard of an abortion at all was my first year teaching. So I was 21 and I required my students to keep their binders neat. And every week I would do a binder check. And this one student, I won't share her name, but I've never forgotten, had something in the front part of her binder. And I was like, oh, remember, you can't have that. And she got very flustered. And her friends kind of giggled. And she said, no, I really want to hang on to this, but please don't take it out. And I didn't realize until she kind of pulled me quietly aside, it was an ultrasound. And her mother made her get an abortion. And she was dealing with that as an 8th grader.
That's heavy.
And it was very heavy and it was very jarring. And I don't mean to center myself, but I guess I've just been either really privileged and in a bubble, or I think more accurate is probably this is happening all around me, but no one's talking about it.
Exactly.
Well, I think you made a point earlier about being a social economic thing. I grew up in a very low income area, low income household, low income family. And I was one of the few people in high school who had a car. And I remember taking one of my friends at 17 to go get an abortion and holding her hand through it and doing the whole thing because she was 17 and what was she going to do? She wasn't married, didn't have any money. Her parents were waiters and cooks at restaurants. They didn't have any money, right? She didn't have a social economic choice, right, in doing that, right? Even the medical care of being pregnant wasn't an option for her. They didn't have health insurance, right? Her family were servers at a restaurant.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the conversation that is not getting the attention that it needs is the idea of someone even debating or considering an abortion, if this individual is pregnant, right? There is so much more to the decision than, do I have the baby? Do I not have the baby? Right? Like, there's the health and well-being of that individual as they are pregnant and as they carry that pregnancy. There is the trauma of birth, right? Which, because it is traumatic,
Mm-hmm.
it is always a danger to the health of the person carrying that pregnancy. Always. There's always a risk to the life of the mother. And then it's all the after, right? Do you have the resources for childcare? Do you have even the resources to go to the doctor's appointments while you're pregnant? If you were to choose to have your baby be, open for adoption, there's still repercussions and demands on those individuals, even just during pregnancy, that some people can't do, right? If they're working one job, 2 jobs, whatever, you can't necessarily take all the time off of work to get those appointments, to get the health and care that you need to stay healthy, for the baby to grow healthy, right? And then all the after, there's the childcare, there's, schooling, there's medical insurance, all these different pieces.
There's food,
that
there's
no
clothes,
one
there's shoes. Like,
There's
talks
other
about.
kids sometimes
Yeah.
too. Like, there was one story in your book, Katey, that was about a mother whose mental health was really, really suffering.
Mhm.
Woke up every morning just with suicidal thoughts, right? But she had other kids to care for.
Right.
She had to make that hard choice to keep herself well and keep herself well for her kids. And I think people forget that part too. It's not like a first-time parent all the time.
I will
Majority
say
are parents already who
Yeah.
have
That
abortions.
shocked me.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a parenting decision, as you're
Totally.
saying. And that's so common that people really have limited resources, like emotional resources, financial resources. And they say, I need to care for the kids that I have now. And Heidi is the person whose story you're talking about. And part of it was she was in a relationship that was not supportive. And once she was able to heal from that, from the mental health issues she had, get out of that relationship and get into a new relationship, she did have another baby. But she could do that because she was in a supportive relationship where she could, have what she needed to like have a healthy pregnancy.
Yep.
And there's just so many factors. I think that's the point. It's like, that's why I call my book a complicated choice. It's really never simple. Like, maybe in some cases, if it's somebody's health where there's no option for them to survive, like maybe that's a little bit easier. But for most people, they are factoring in like everything that you can think of because they are full human beings.
Yeah.
I can honestly say, when you were first introducing the episode, right, I very much was very scared to have this conversation for a year, right? We've been talking about it. In the last 2 weeks,
Procrastinate.
I am okay having this conversation now.
What
because
changed for you, Tania?
What changed in the last 2 weeks, Tania?
the election,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
right? The fact that Roe v. Wade was overturned, the choice on abortion and all the policies that are being made around it put back into the states, and we see all of the rollbacks that are happening and the decline in progress. And so it's one of those things. I am a very privileged individual. I have a healthy son who's 10. I have a wonderful marriage. I have a beautiful home. If I were to get pregnant tomorrow, I would choose to have an abortion. And I know, like, in the moment, I might change my mind. I want to be able to change my mind. I want to have the freedom to make that choice in the moment, but knowing what I know and what I went through with my one and only pregnancy, I don't think I would survive it.
Well, it's also some of the reasons you chose not to have another pregnancy.
Mentally and emotionally, even.
And physically.
This is not something where I could point to a doctor and say, oh no, I might die on the table, so you should allow me to have an abortion. Mentally and emotionally, I do not think I would survive another pregnancy and baby. And I am so happy with the family that we have now. And the fact that I might not have the ability to make that choice because some politician or doctor makes the decision for me and says, no, you're not in danger enough.
Well, even people who are
Your life
in
is not on the
danger-
line enough.
But the difference is, even people who are in danger enough and life is on the line enough are still dying.
yes.
Because the doctors
Because they
are
can't
scared.
get there.
Or their fertility is ruined, or, just because someone's life is preserved doesn't mean they have the quality of life that
Right.
they had before. And the laws are so confusing. We've just seen this in Texas where doctors there's no clear interpretation of the law of where they can intervene and not. And so they are opting not to intervene, at the risk and peril of all the pregnant people who come to them for care, which I think we're asking doctors to really go back on their Hippocratic oath, and the nurses and everybody who cares for them. If this is what it means to be pro-life, I think we need to do some serious moral interrogation of what that means. If the lives of those who are pregnant don't matter, I don't know that we can claim that that's a pro-life stance.
Yeah. I mean, it's just even from a faith perspective, like certainly growing up, we didn't talk about it, but I feel like there are certain walks of faith that believe that life starts at inception and therefore it is wrong. There are also faiths like the Jewish faith, I believe, where they believe life starts at a first breath, right? And all of that. And I don't know, I keep coming back to this. I have had a miscarriage. I didn't need to have a D&C, but like many of my friends who've had miscarriages did. And so I even think about just care. And I don't know, I hate to put myself in the bucket. You mentioned this in your book of women who are like, I'm pro-choice, but it wouldn't be for me. That's kind of where I sit.
Kind of thought about you.
But I don't, I made me feel some sort of way. And maybe that's just where I am in my journey.
But you, to be clear, if you had needed an abortion when you miscarried, you would have gotten one. You would not have said, no, it is against my faith.
Probably. Yeah. But I think I would have really struggled. Like I would have really, even though I did nothing in that experience of a miscarriage, I still, it's kind of what you said about your mom. Like I felt like I did do something bad. Like I clearly
you were worried.
Like my body did it. My body miscarried this pregnancy that I really wanted. So I was bad and I felt shame and stigma, even though it was just a miscarriage. So I can only imagine. I guess what I'm trying to say is when that happened, people were like, well, the baby's with God, or they're back in heaven, or the spirit of the baby's with God. And a very and the intention was to be comforting. Didn't feel that way, but let's just assume for a second that was comforting. Isn't that also what happens in an abortion? Like the spirit or the baby, if it was even there, I don't know that I believe it, would also go back to God. And wouldn't that be welcome and comforting? Like I don't, there's just some cognitive dissonance, I think, in like how people make these things are okay. And they can like tell themselves a faith story in this vein, but like very similar situations because of
as long as they agree with the rationale or the circumstances.
All of a sudden, the faith behind it is completely interpreted differently. Does that make any sense, Katey?
It does. And I've been thinking about this a lot. I just lost my mom a couple of months ago, and how the tie from end of life and beginning of life to me are very similar. And if any of you have been around someone dying or around when they've died, like they're often not there, especially with a terminal illness. You can sense like their being isn't there. And so I often think like there is, this gets into my own beliefs, but I do believe we go into a spiritual realm that is, not here. We can't sense those people anymore, but that our spirit lives on. So I do believe it's a process. And I think it's similar at the beginning. I think that there is like the soul is making some kind of agreements about what body they're going to, come down and be part of. And I think there's a whole discernment process on both sides. It's like very mysterious. And I wish we could just hold the mystery and allow those things to be mysterious, and then focus our intention on preserving the health and dignity and well-being of the pregnant person, because that is who we can see. That is the person who's right here, who's living a life. Trust that person to make the decision for themselves instead of trying to figure out what theologians have been arguing about since the beginning of time.
Right.
What is life? What does it mean? What happens after we die? These are core life questions that everyone asks. And rather than trying to get into the minutia of like, it must be this, when we really don't know, like, let's focus our energy on what we do know, which is people need to be cared for in community. And we are doing a horrible job at that. And I just feel like I could spend the rest of my life just caring for people in need of care and not even have these philosophical debates. Like, what good do they do other than, not preserve the dignity of the people who need it most?
So I think it's interesting talking about like when life began. So I'm going to push it to Jenny as our residential ShePack religious person.
That is not a title I accept.
But our one and only religious
you are
ShePack
more.
I have a lot of faith. I do believe in God, and I'm very active in more than one church.
Right. So like I would known you as my religious friend.
Okay.
Right? Like you
there's a minister right here.
Well, I'm just talking about out of like the four of us originally. You are the one who wanted to bring in a minister for this conversation, right?
Yep.
Which is a different choice than bringing in maybe like a doctor. Right? So like coming from a spiritual place, when do you truly believe life begins? Since your beliefs have changed over the last, 20 years.
I don't know.
And
But-
do you think it should be a conversation in abortion?
I think because I am a mother, because I've had 3 pregnancies and 2 births, because I'm a woman, I think that there's wisdom in my body that I didn't know before. Like, it sounds cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs,
I
but
love
like,
Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
I knew when I miscarried, like when, I don't know, when you're pregnant, you know that there's like a little person and you like talk to it and you feel it and there's like a knowing. And I also knew that when that spirit was not there.
That's
And
not cuckoo at all.
I
Intuition.
trust other women and their bodies to know their own bodies. So I don't know if I could medically answer it. Like, I think it's at first breath, or I think it's at implementation, or I don't know what I think. And I'll probably feel guilty no matter what I think. But I think we just have to trust women.
I think for me, the hardest thing I have about this whole concept is that everyone has a right to have their beliefs about when life begins, right? Based on their faith or their belief system, whatever that might be. But the medical side of it, I feel is separate and is different. And what I see happening, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that policymakers are using belief structures to make policies that affect medical life and death decisions.
They're weaponizing.
And those two things have to be teased apart, right? A fetus, it is a fetus until it is born, correct? Is that still the terminology?
Correct.
Until that baby leaves the mother's body, it's a fetus. And then it is a baby. And then we start counting their age at 0. They are 1 day old on the day they are born, right? When they come into this world. And babies come into this world in lots of different ways. And some are medically fragile and they need help breathing. And so I see the conversation happen about, well, if they can breathe on their own, then they're a person. And some babies can't when they come out of the womb, right? Like, so there's just so much gray area that's happening. And it just bogs down the whole thing, where the distinction is you're still making decisions for an unborn life, child, fetus, at the cost of the living, functioning person in the world that has people counting on them, that has a life ahead of them, and that you might be taking those opportunities away. And that it just kills me, not to mention the fact that all these restrictions that are starting to come in, right? Like, a 6-week abortion ban. If you get it before 6 weeks, it's allowed.
You hardly
We aren't
know
even
if you're
allowed to go
pregnant.
into the doctor's office until we are more than 6 weeks to get
They
the
don't want you
confirmation
until, like, 12 weeks
ultrasound.
anyway.
Right? It's even more than 6
because
weeks.
they know that the viability at that point is it's most likely to have a miscarriage that early on. So
It's maddening
gonna do
to
it.
me that they, policymakers, lawmakers are putting these, exceptions in place. And then there's the whole exceptions rule that I do want to go down. But if you guys want to talk more about when life begins, we can do that before we go down that rabbit hole, because I feel a lot of ways about it. But it's just impossible. I do have one statistic here that I don't know if it's helpful or not. And these statistics largely come from the CDC and Pew Research Center, which are highly reputable sources. But in 2021, 80.9% of abortions were performed at less than 9 weeks gestation, and 93.1% were at less than 13 weeks gestation, right? So just even after they were allowed to come into the doctor for a first visit.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to provide a little context there.
Yeah. I think that complicates things a lot. Women often don't know that they're even pregnant for a while.
Especially if they're not trying, right?
Yeah.
Or if they have irregular cycles.
Yeah. Or going through something stressful. Like, how do you even take informed action?
And contraception
enough.
can fail. You could be doing
Yep.
all the right things and your contraception could fail and you might be pregnant and you're just living your life like nothing, right?
Yep.
Because why would
And
you think you are?
You don't know. You really, really don't know. And I don't think it's anyone's place to decide that. Medically, I'm with you on needing like tease it apart to some extent.
Yeah.
But it's not my business to tell anyone else what they think, what they believe. I could argue for any of it. I mean, there's this abstract life has begun at conception for me, but also I know that medically, like you're saying, that's not a whole person yet, but on their way. Like, the potential is there. I do wonder if people kind of fall in love with the romanticized idea of who that person could be, and then can't handle the grief of that comes with that, of losing that potential person. But like there is a point where medically, like that fetus is not going to survive. So I think that matters a lot in these decisions too. But it's not for me to say. The intuition that you're talking about, Jenny, I felt that personally. Like with Derek, I knew. I just woke up one morning like, it's pregnancy test day. And it was positive. Like I just knew. It was the weirdest thing. It was the weirdest thing. So I think people can decide for themselves.
Is there anything in your background, Ashley, as Persian or your family that influenced your point of view on this topic?
No, because it wasn't talked about at all. And I don't know why, but it just never came up. I do know that like in Islam, I'm not a practicing Muslim, but in Islam, there is a, I think, very graceful way of giving that space for gestation to happen. I think it's kind of the spiritual equivalent of like viability, basically. So that's pretty profound. And I find in general, Islam tends to, if you read it for what it is, word for word, right, not interpretations, it's actually really compassionate to women in general. So these things have been kind of considered and factored into the religion already. But it wasn't talked about. Maybe that's why. Maybe it was just a non-issue because of my father's upbringing and stuff. I don't know.
I think it's interesting. I don't disagree with necessarily having laws, rules, and regulations around medical procedures, right? Like we have them in other medical, like about like organ donations and other things, right? But I do not believe you can put laws and regulations around something when you're not providing additional support beyond that, right? So like my opinion would be like, you can't be pro-life and not pro-birth, right? We don't have any resources in the U.S. that support women to have these children, right? Even as somebody who is highly privileged as us, right? Who have good jobs, who have good, support systems. It was so hard to have a baby, to pay for that baby, to pay for daycare for that baby, to pay for medical expenses of a medical issue from that baby. How could you expect anybody else who doesn't have those same resources to do that?
You don't even know what it
funding
is
just being cut left and right.
Yeah.
And we're the only I think we are the only nation in the world that doesn't have guaranteed paid parental leave.
I mean, I remember when I had my first baby, I worked at a research institution that like talked about, I think the slogan is, what's the slogan? It's like, for the human good or something about like
improving the human condition.
Improving the human condition is the total logo of the company I worked for, and they did not have maternity leave.
That's wild to me. That is
literally did not have maternity leave, did not have support for working mothers, did not have like nursing rooms. I remember like being in my office, like pumping milk. I used short-term disability in my PTO to have my first kid, who I had C-section with, and I was back at work 3 months later with zero PTO left at the end of that because
for the baby that's going to
inevitably get sick and whose daycare cost me more than my salary, right?
Daycare
and like,
almost crushed us. I did not know what it was until we suddenly had to pay it.
Right. And like the idea that children are actually so expensive, and people say, all you need is love. Well, they also need other things.
All you need is the grandparents to take the kid. You might not have that support structure, right? Like,
right. So like the idea that this country wants to lean to like pro-life, but not pro-actual birth, and the amount of children that are in foster care or waiting to be adopted, right? They say, just put your baby up for adoption. How many children are up for adoption or in the foster care system at any given time? You don't want those? You just want a fresh baby only? Like, right? Like it's like such a hypocrisy of it all.
Well, there was someone in your book that considered that, right? Wasn't it twins? And they were going to be white twins, and they felt like deeply uncomfortable about how they'd be perceived on the adoption market. Like that, I had a hard time with that part.
because of the privilege that those white babies would receive over other babies in the system.
I think they also were concerned because they were someone living with some mental illness that, that's often genetic. And what would happen if they ended up in a family that didn't take care of their mental health?
Yep.
And just kind of playing out all the scenarios. And again, I just feel like that was a parenting decision.
Yeah.
Of just, I will not feed into this. And I'm not an expert on adoption, but I do know just from talking with folks, like there is always trauma there. There's trauma for the birth mother. There's trauma for the child who, ends up in an adoptive family, even if that's a very loving place. I mean, it's just, there is trauma there. And I think we cannot underestimate in any of these situations that it is complicated. There is no easy decision. Many people say, I had no good option. There's a story in the book of a woman who at one point terminated a pregnancy and then decided to parent alone and felt judged just as harshly in each situation. She was like, I could do nothing. I could do nothing and have it feel like it was
no right.
I could do no right.
Yeah.
It's like she could not be an
You're
embodied
damned
woman
if you don't.
and have a reproductive journey that was acceptable to anyone. And I read that story, I think really resonated with me of just how no matter what, there's like this, we live in a very punitive culture when it comes to people's reproductive lives, and even more so with the laws that we see versus pre-Roe, they are so punitive in nature, not just for like the people who need access to abortion, but the people who help them. And I think that's one of the biggest differences I see now. And we haven't even really talked about like folks who need to travel to get abortion care, but that is more and more common now. I mean, South Carolina has a 6-week ban. North Carolina has been a place that many people have come from, states like Florida. Florida just failed to pass their constitutional amendment that would have enshrined abortion rights in the law. So then if you find out you're pregnant, you have to get the money not only for the procedure, but to get to a place that has an appointment during the time that you can get an abortion. I mean, the amount of complications that people have to deal with now, post Dobbs, we're hearing more and more of those stories. And I think that's why when abortion is on the ballot, we are finding more and more people are supportive of abortion rights. And yet they also vote for a presidential candidate who is the very reason why we need to have those constitutional amendments. So I've been dealing with the cognitive dissonance around that. But it is interesting to me that people are understanding the implications of these abortion bans finally. It's just, but now we're here, and how do we get ourselves out of it?
Well, and North Carolina is not a sure state. Like,
No,
we're
it's
on
not.
the brink of many bans.
That's correct.
Depending on how, I think there's still even a race going on right now that's 500 votes apart.
They're counting still.
That they're still counting for our Supreme Court in the state that's 500 vote difference right now.
Right.
Like, that will change the laws that are in North Carolina in the next 4 years.
I wanted to share, I don't know if this is the right place for this statistic, but you had asked about maternal mortality rates, right? Because we're talking about the, health care and care offered to women. The United States has the highest maternal mortality rate among developed nations. The highest. In 2022, the U.S. reported 22 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births. That rate is more than double or triple than that of other high-income countries. So, for instance, this is not even double or triple. Norway had 0 maternal deaths per 100 live births, and Switzerland had 1.2 compared to 22.
That's incredible.
Right? And then also you got to think about like the other supports that are in place in those countries around birth and around, maternal leave, parental leave, and supports that are there in the systems too.
That's exactly where mine goes. Like, what are they doing well that we can learn from? What do they have that works?
Yeah, socialized medicine. So,
but then there's one other connected statistic I just really want to share: the safety of abortions, right? Versus the safety of having a birth. The risk of death from carrying a child to term in the U.S. is approximately 14 times greater than the risk of death from a legal abortion.
And that's just physical health. That's not even emotional.
Legal's a good
mental.
That's just risk of death. That's not even health in general, right?
I would say safe instead of legal, because there are safe abortions that are not legal. I would just add a safe.
Yeah.
No, that's
especially as we move into this new legal system we're walking into, right? Like, there's going to be options for safe abortions that are not going to be legal in states, right? And we're going back in time.
We'll figure it out. We'll take care of each other.
Right. But it's interesting because you think about live birth, right? Who here had a perfectly not complicated birth?
The second time?
How do we define that?
Right? Like, there was no complications. There was no risks. You didn't have
I didn't almost die?
Yeah.
50% of the time.
But or even you have a blood condition or blood clotting condition that makes it unsafe no matter what kind of happens with your birth, right?
Right.
I might have had the least complicated.
Well, yeah, because you're the
amongst us.
bathtub birth.
Oh, I had a bathtub birth too.
Oh,
It was
you did?
complicated.
Oh, my
Right,
God.
On purpose?
Yeah. I used
Okay.
the birth center. I mean, that was partly
But you were
why.
like with medical care, not at your house.
Oh, yeah. I went to
They didn't make it in time. They were supposed to be there, but they didn't make it in time. But that's why I'm asking this question, because I had 2 precipitous labors, and like that's a complication in its
Like
own
if
way.
I did not have my baby in a hospital both
Mhm.
times, I would be dead.
I
Yes.
would not have made it to the hospital a second time.
Right.
That kid fell out in 45 minutes. Like,
Fell out.
I contracted an infection when they broke my water and then crashed after my son was born.
that's
And
part of what contributes to like the maternal like fatality rates and stuff too, is like the almost like
introduced
over
the
engineering
infection.
of labor and delivery sometimes. I was terrified of that. That's why I went for a home birth the second time. Like I was just so scared of the hospital.
But my point being, like, look, out of all of us here, right? Like,
No one had it easy.
there was no non-complicated part of us giving birth, right?
Yeah.
Like, it is scary to think how dangerous it actually is to have a child.
Even the pregnancy itself was dangerous. Like, because you've got blood clotting stuff
I'd
going
be
on.
blood thinners the whole time.
Yep. Like I remember you with your first, like trying to walk that kid out and your hips were just like hurting something
Ugh.
fierce. I had pups with my first and I want to just rip my skin off. I've never felt anything
I had
so
placenta
awful.
previa, and I was
Oh yeah. I mean, you had complications too, like getting into like labor and everything. Like it's not just the delivery itself that's so awful. It's everything leading up to it. I mean, I ended up back on antidepressants and in therapy while pregnant with my first because it did something to me. Like
Hormonally.
Yeah.
broke my brain, haven't been right since. Like it's just not. It's
I think
not
that's why I want my doctors to feel empowered to use any tool they need to keep me healthy. And that's where I get scared about these laws and regulations where they feel like they can't.
They
I
get
feel like it
handcuffed.
puts their license in jeopardy. I don't know. Like I guess
hard for them too. They're sitting there looking at you like, I know something that can help you and I can't say it, or my livelihood is on the line. Like that's awful for them,
Right.
for
I'm
everybody.
gonna just keep coming back to Jenny because you actually have the only girl
Yeah.
in us.
Well, Katey has a daughter too.
Okay, Katey has a daughter too. But for you ladies who have daughters, right?
It hits different.
I assume it is greatly different with the new regulations in our country of what that your daughter has less rights today than you did growing up. And what does that mean for how you're approaching parenting for her?
I mean, I just feel like growing up, I, as a woman, even a teenager, early 20s, like I just took Roe v. Wade for granted. Like I really thought it was a fundamental right and it would never go away. One that I'd never hoped to have to partake in, but also didn't judge other. You know, like it just was this thing that felt evergreen. And it's been very jarring to realize that's not, and to realize how quickly that has changed. Now, I have an IUD. I am hopefully done having children. My husband has had a vasectomy, but you never know. And as a, you know, I do worry about my daughter, other young women. It makes me, frankly, want to leave and move and be somewhere where she can go get the medical care she needs. It also makes me want to do something, but I don't know what that thing is, you know, to try to advocate or change things. I guess I felt, in years past, I felt like, oh, politics, like I don't have to vote. Like that doesn't apply. It doesn't matter to me. What a privileged way to think. Haven't felt that way in the past decade, but I used to, right? And now I feel like, oh, I don't know enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not researched enough. Or I'm scared. But I think that's step one for me, is at least being willing to like have the
Are you having
conversation.
open dialogues even at your daughter's young age about these conversations that are happening?
Not about abortion, but about her body, about puberty, about sex.
About the elections, about what is happening, what rights are
No, not yet.
interesting. Okay.
No, Sam is double the age Luna is.
Yeah.
So maybe it's different at 10. I am with Cruz a little bit at 10 than a 5-year-old.
Yeah, I think I'm having the same conversations with both kids at the same time, which is maybe why
yeah.
for age-wise it doesn't matter. But for your daughter who's 10, you said?
Yes, she is very knowledgeable. I've been very open with her from the time she was small about her own body, but also about the work that I do and how it is about more than just our reproductive lives. This really is about like our freedom. It's our bodily autonomy, and it's tied to all of the other infringements upon our freedom that we see, and helping people understand that like the attacks on trans rights and the attacks on reproductive rights and the attack on immigrant rights and voting rights are all linked. And even if you feel like quote unquote safe from one of those, they're coming for all of us.
Yeah.
So understanding how all of these things are tied to like a greater political agenda, a destruction of our democracy. Like, I want her to understand that any issue she hears about impacts her, even if it's not directly.
Because I don't think people understand the amount of laws and precedent that was set from the Dobbs case.
Correct.
That then trickles to many other cases that they're trying to overturn, because it is not about abortion, it is about privacy.
That's correct. And also, Clarence Thomas said specifically, basically anything that has been done by the court since the 60s is up for grabs.
Right.
So that includes gay marriage and really any right that you can think of that the Supreme Court has been an activist around is up for grabs at this point. And the guardrails are gone.
Yeah.
So understanding that larger narrative is scary, but also it helps to understand that this moment that we're in has been a long time in the making, and it's going to take us a long time to get out of it. But there is work that we can do. We have to understand how we got here. And that's what a lot of my work is centered around, is like understanding that it's never just been about abortion. It's about a whole agenda.
Yeah. So if people wanted to learn more about...
what do we do?
Yeah. So like if people wanted to learn more about what this actually means, because I think it does affect every single person, whether they know it or not.
Men too, boys too. They're affected.
Men too. Like, let's just...
Not to play the pick-me game. I don't mean it that way. But I heard it when I said it. It does.
Right. It hurts everybody.
And we've got boys too. So, if they find themselves in a situation with someone in the future that they don't want to be in, that would be great if they had options.
But I would say, unfortunately, they do have options, because they can do nothing.
I'm not teaching my kids that they can do nothing.
Just because you're not teaching them,
I hear you practically,
doesn't mean that they can't just do nothing.
Have to answer to me if they do nothing.
Right?
They do not want
But like, that's my point, is that it's not like they actually have the option to walk away and say, I have no repercussions for what happened here, because I didn't, you were saying earlier, ejaculate responsibly.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. And
honestly, that's what we gotta like teach our boys too. Like, the responsibility goes both ways.
I think the framework that we are still fighting under, right, in terms of, gender oppression is very prevalent to this as well. You think about the exceptions that are talked about for, okay, well, we allow a 6-week abortion ban, and we're going to be gracious and allow these exceptions, right, for rape and incest, the two you always hear about. Can we just say out loud the fact that those individuals have to first be violated against their will before they are allowed to have bodily autonomy to make a choice about that pregnancy? And then you have to prove it in the courts.
Right.
And let's say that, the women don't fare very well in the court of law or the court of public opinion either, right, in terms of what has happened to their body and if they can be believed or not. Like, it's asinine to me.
I think it's also important to state that a lot of these regulations don't have those exceptions.
A lot of them don't.
They don't have those exceptions.
But there are people who, abortion's okay in those cases. Why? Why can you get right with the idea that abortion is allowed and acceptable in those cases, but not when a woman chooses that decision for her own well-being for whatever reason it might be?
It's not about the fetus then.
It's not.
No, it's the punitiveness of it.
The stigma of abortion, that there is the messaging of the anti-abortion movement, which is very steeped in Christian nationalism, has manufactured a narrative that abortion is morally wrong. It is bad. And even if you don't believe that, we all hear it enough that it kind of seeps into our collective imagination, is how I think of it. And so that's when I talk about the function of abortion stigma, similar to internalized racism and sexism and homophobia. Like, they act politically. They keep us from talking. You're saying probably these people in my life have had abortions, and I don't know. It keeps us from talking. It keeps us from, really like having the compassion, because we go to the place of judgment. Like that whole, well, I don't think I would ever have an abortion. That is so common among people who hold like, you don't need an abortion until you need one, right? But like the idea of I can distance myself from those people who have abortions is a function of that stigma. And it's not our fault that we have it. I'm very clear about this. Like, I have my own that I have to work through. But it is our responsibility to address it and say, do I want to maintain this attitude, or do I want to choose to shift it and choose compassion? And even if I don't understand why someone is in a situation, I don't need to be compassionate. It doesn't require empathy. We can just say, I trust this person with their intuition, like we were talking. I trust them with their intuition, their inner knowing, what they need. And my job isn't to convince them otherwise. It is to say, what is it that you need to get there? And I will help you. To me, that is the faith call, or the call to just be a good human. What is it that you need? How can I be in community with this person instead of it being so hyper individualistic? And I think that is what will save us. Getting out of hyper individualism. It's what's best for me. It's like, what is good for all? And what is good for all is good for the most vulnerable in the community at this time. And I think a pregnant person in this culture is absolutely in that list right now. Yep.
So we're talking about...
Sorry.
That's okay. We like it.
We're why I brought you.
More.
Preach.
Fitting.
So tell us more about some resources in which we can go and find and direct our listeners to either learn more about, or somebody who is in this vulnerable community can find.
Absolutely. So a few things. If you are looking for ways to directly help folks who are seeking abortions, I always tell folks to go to the National Network of Abortion Funds in NAF. We have one here in North Carolina, the Carolina Abortion Fund, which I actually helped start when I first moved to North Carolina. But those organizations are directly funding not just the abortion procedures, but the transportation, the childcare, the hotels, the meals, everything that people need. So if you're looking for like a place to give money, I always say go find the abortion fund in your state or neighboring state. If you're looking for like abortion statistics, I always recommend the Guttmacher Institute is a great place to go if you just want to learn more. And if you are a person of faith or interested in the faith aspect, you can visit our organizational website, which is rcrc.org. And we also have a partner site called Abortions Welcome, that if you are someone who has experienced an abortion, like it could be right now, it could be 10 years ago, we have spiritual resources for you at abortionswelcome.org, and also all of the medical and legal information that you need, like links to the most accurate information. If you're like, I don't know, what can I do in my state, or how do I take these pills? All of it's linked there. So there's just a few. There's others, but just be careful what you find on the internet.
Yeah.
There are a lot of sites that pose as pro-choice sites that are actually anti-choice sites. So,
oh God.
Yep. Those crisis centers.
Yeah, and honestly, you can always reach out to me too. I can give you all my socials. I'm at Katey Zeh, but if you ever have a question, I'm happy to be like a resource to your listeners too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us all your socials so that they can come follow you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I have a weird name, Katey Zeh, Z like in zebra, EH, and you can find me on all the socials. And my DMs are open. Do people still say that?
Yeah, you do now. I think they do.
I think that makes me sound old, but yeah, feel free to reach out there and be happy to talk with you.
But I think that's something that really struck me is like when I first texted you about this, you were like out of state, like blessing an abortion clinic. I didn't know that was a thing people did.
It's a thing that we started a while ago. There was a new Planned Parenthood that was opening in DC, and they wanted to have an interfaith blessing of the new space. And so it was this very joyous, beautiful, like, I don't know, it felt like a graduation. Like it was just pomp and circumstance. It was so amazing. And we've continued to do that. But of course, the situation is different depending on where you are. And before Roe, before the fall of Roe, we were dealing with abortion bans and restrictions in other states like Texas. So we were doing some there. But this one was actually of an abortion clinic, a reproductive health care clinic in West Virginia that can no longer provide abortion care because they have a total ban in the state. But they decided we are going to care for our community. They went to Maryland just across the border and opened up a facility there, and now can provide abortion care just across the state lines. But we felt like it was important to honor both of those staffs because the West Virginia team is grieving the abortion loss. They can't provide the care anymore, but they're still doing all kinds of other amazing things, but also their resilience in opening up this clinic in Maryland and in Appalachia to serve the community there, and getting to go and give them space to grieve and feel and be together in community was just such an amazing gift to give them, and a gift for me to go and be part of that with them. So that is some of the sacred work that we do at RCRC.
Katey, thank you so much for being here today. I value your time and your wisdom that you bring to this and your experience. I think that that's what we can all bring to this conversation is our personal experiences. and honest conversations and genuinely seeking to learn more and to learn how we can do more to support other individuals. So thank you so much for being here. It's really special.
Thank you so much for having me, for all of your candor and sharing some of your stories with me. I really feel like we created our own sacred space today. So thank you for the work that you're putting out in the world. I'm thrilled to be part of it today.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, if you want to find more information on our sites, you can go to ShePack Unleashed and follow us there on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube Shorts. Be kinder there, people on YouTube.
Shorts are mean.
YouTube Shorts are mean. Be kind on YouTube, guys. And follow us so that you can stay part of all the episodes we have.
Thank you for being a part of our pack.
This is Ashley, Jenny, Nichole, Tania, and our wonderful guest, Katey Zeh. Thank you for being a part of our pack. Stay wild and fierce.